Hey, welcome to the series of everything you need to know about Python in simplest possible way. In our previous videos, we haven't much discussed about tuples, right? So from this video onwards, in our coming videos, we will be knowing more and more about this particular tuples. So as part of that, in this video, we will be knowing the introduction about this particular tuples and how we can create the tuples. So as part of that, we will be knowing some of the important concepts regarding tuples. So the first point that we have, which is tuples are exactly same as list except that it is a immutable. So if you watch our previous series about list, we have discussed much and more details about list, right? So tuple is also considered same as list, and the only difference between list and tuple is that tuple is considered as immutable element, rather list is considered as mutable element. We have discussed about this particular immutability when we are discussing list, and we have discussed about immutability when we are discussing strings, right? So mutability means you can able to modify the elements inside of a list when you have created the list afterwards. So you cannot able to modify the elements inside of a string when once you have created the string. So the same thing, the immutability, same thing applies for the tuple also. When once you create the tuple, you cannot able to modify the elements inside of a tuple. So that is what the difference between list and tuple. So that resulted tuple is only read-only version of list, which means you can only read the data from the tuple and you cannot write the data and you cannot modify the existing tuple. So after that, we are having one more important point, which is insertion order is preserved. In the way that you created the tuple, the way that will be stored the elements inside of a tuple. So this point have a significance when we are discussing sets. So I will give brief about sets. Sets don't have the preservation of insertion order. So sets will be very random. So here tuple is having the mechanism of insertion order will be preserved in how much of way that you created the tuple, and the insertion order will be remains as it is. So that we will be discussing as and when that time comes. So after that, we are having one more point, which is duplicates are allowed, which means you can have a specific element repeated more number of times. So apart from that, heterogeneous objects are also allowed, which means you can have the elements inside of a tuple which are of different data types. You can have list inside of a tuple, you can have a tuple inside of a tuple, you can have string inside of a tuple, you can have let's say integers inside of a tuple. Like this, you can have any type of elements, any type of data types inside of a tuple. That is what the heterogeneous objects inside of a tuple. So accessing elements through indexing, like that, like in previous data types that we have discussed, which are list and string, in here also we can access the elements of tuple using indexing. So I hope you have understood all the points discussed here. So let us go ahead and see how we can create a tuple. So one of the way that we can create tuple is by simply mentioning this particular parenthesis. So by using this parenthesis only, we will be representing the tuple. So in order to make you understand, I will take a tuple and I will assign this particular empty parenthesis here. So after that, if I print this particular type of this particular tuple 1, if I execute this, you can see the result. We are getting the result, which is nothing but tuple. So which means this particular parenthesis is used to represent the tuple, and we have created a tuple here. So this is completely different with the list, right? So you can create an empty list initially and you can add elements later on, right? So but whereas tuple, you cannot create an empty tuple and you cannot modify the tuple later on. So be careful whenever you are creating the empty tuple, it won't be modified laterwards. So apart from that, one more way that we can create a tuple is having the elements inside of a tuple. So I will take, let's say, to make it simple, I will just take it as a t. So consider this particular t as a tuple. So here I will be considering the elements, let's say 1, 2, 3. So if I print this particular t here, and we will be getting all the elements inside of a tuple inside of a parenthesis. So if I print the type of this particular t, you can able to see the result. We are getting the type as tuple. So if you wanted to create an empty tuple, you can simply represent this particular parenthesis. If you wanted to mention some of the elements inside of a tuple, you can use these elements and mentioning inside of this particular parenthesis. So there is one more way that we can create a tuple. So let's say I will take this particular same t here and I will assign, let's say I will take t1 here in order to differentiate with the previous example. I will take, let's say 1, 2, let's say I will take the different elements also, let's say 3, 4, 5 here. So if I print this particular t1 here, if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting this particular elements of 3, 4, 5 separated comma inside of this particular parenthesis. How is that happens? Let us check the type of this particular t1. So I will print the type of this particular t1 here, and if I execute this, you can able to see the result we are getting as a tuple, which means you can understand by this, whenever you are mentioning the elements separated by comma, it will be considered as a tuple. And you can see the result, we are printing the tuple and we are getting the result of this particular elements present inside of a parenthesis. And after that you can check the type also, we are getting the tuple. So by this you can able to understand, you can create a tuple by simply mentioning the elements separated by comma. So this way you can able to create, but the suggested one is that always suggested to mention this particular parenthesis that tells other developers also, let's say if this is a tuple. So you can create, though you can create by mentioning like this, so it is always suggested to mention the parenthesis. So I hope you can able to understand how we can create a tuple by mentioning the elements. So one more thing you need to understand is that, let's say I will take one more tuple, let's say T2 here, and inside of this particular T2, I will be having, let's say, some elements here. So let's say if I print this particular T2 here, and if I execute this, we can only get one here, and we are not getting this particular parenthesis. Let us check the type of this particular T2 here. So if I print type of this particular T2 and if I execute this, we are getting the type which is int. Though we have mentioned this particular one inside of this particular parenthesis, but still we are getting the result as int. The reason is because this particular element is present inside of this particular parenthesis considered as a single element itself. In order to convert this element as a tuple, you also need to mention one more thing, which is nothing but comma. So if you mention this comma, then only it will consider as a tuple. And if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting the parenthesis here, and also we are getting the type which is nothing but a tuple here. So the same thing happens in here also. I will take T3 and here I will mention 2 comma here. And if I print T3 here and if I execute this, we are getting a tuple. Though I haven't mentioned the parenthesis here, we are getting a tuple. Only the reason we are mentioning the comma here. So if I print the type, obviously we can expect the result which is nothing but tuple. So still I will print this and you can see we are getting the result as a tuple. So like this, these are the different ways that we can create a tuple, and these are the different ways that we need to handle carefully whenever we are creating a tuple. So always, though you have mentioned the parenthesis, whenever you are having the single element, you always need to mention a comma. If you don't mention the comma, it will be considered as a single element itself. Let's say if I put, let's say, like here, and if I execute this, it was still considered as a like because we haven't have a comma here. And if I mention a comma here and if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting the result as a tuple. So like this, we can able to create this particular tuple by simply mentioning this particular comma whenever we are having a single element. So I hope you can able to understand these different methods to create tuple. There are some more methods. First, I need to make your acknowledgement to understand this particular. You have understood all this concept. One is by simply mentioning an empty parenthesis. After, by mentioning the elements inside of this particular parenthesis. After, by mentioning the elements separated by comma. After that, if you have a single element, make sure you are mentioning the comma in order to get a tuple. So apart from that, you can mention a tuple simply like this, but you need to mention the comma. So let's see one more method that we have in order to create tuple, and that is nothing but this particular tuple constructor, also considered as tuple method. So many people consider it is as a constructor because whenever you pass any iterable to this particular tuple, it will create a tuple. So let's say I will pass this particular list is considered as iterable, right? So I will take this list, and inside of this particular list I am having the elements 1 2 3. So if I consider this as a t4 and if I print t4 here, you can able to see we are getting the list inside of a tuple. So previously we have a list, so now we have converted that particular list into a tuple. So after that, if I print the type of this particular tuple t4, we can able to get tuple itself, right? So we are getting the tuple. So like this, whenever you have any iterable, when you pass that iterable to tuple method, it will create a tuple object, which is nothing but tuple element, right? So like this you can able to see. Let's say if I pass, instead of this particular list, if I pass a string here, so string is also considered as iterable, right? So I'm taking this particular string like here, and if I execute this, you can able to see each element inside of a string like is coming as a tuple, you can observe here. So let's say if I pass a range here, so range is also considered as an iterable, right? So I will take 1 to 11, and if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting a tuple of values 1 to 10 inside of a tuple, right? So I hope you can able to understand. So in this way also you can able to create a tuple. So let's say if I pass an empty list here, and if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting an empty tuple here. So if I pass an empty string here, if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting an empty tuple here. Like this, when you pass the iterable which does not have any element, but still you can able to get an empty tuple. So I hope you can able to understand. So in this way also, whenever we are passing an iterable to this particular tuple, we can able to create a tuple with all those iterable elements. So I hope you can able to understand that. And I think you have understood all the methods and different ways that we can able to create a tuple. So I hope you can able to understand all the things explained in this video. And if you found this video interesting, hit the like button. In the next video, we will be seeing how we can access the elements inside of this particular tuple. So we have discussed that we cannot modify the tuple, but we can able to access the tuple, right? We can able to access the elements inside of a tuple. So that we will be discussing in our next video. So to stay updated with my latest videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications to all, so that whenever I upload any video, you will get the notification. So thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.